Welcome back to the podcast, all my dear friends. We are here with another amazing candidate who has a dream job. My guest today's name is Haley Shapley. She is the author of Strong Like Her and an award winning journalist whose writing has appeared in Shape, Self, Teen Vogue, Forbes Health, the Saturday Evening Post, Sierra, The Telegraph, and many other publications. An Olympics superfan and exercise enthusiast, Shapley has cycled 206 miles from Seattle to Portland, summited the highest glaciated peak in the continental United States, competed in a bodybuilding show, and run a marathon. If you didn't discern by all of that, she clearly lives in Seattle. Welcome back to the Pacific Northwest. Haley, thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
I was I was checking the continental thing because I was thinking, oh, Mount McKinley, and then it's the
You got to
continental
add the
U.S.
continental. There's a lot of tall mountains in Alaska, but in the lower 48, Mount Rainier is the mountain that I climbed, for anyone wondering.
So here's the dealio. A lot of the listeners of this show are from Colorado. I mean, they're all over the country, but I just am living between Seattle and Denver. And in Colorado, everyone is obsessed with 14ers, 14,000-foot mountains. It's like the thing that you put on your dating app is how many of these stupid mountains you've climbed. But the elevation is so high in Colorado, you're starting at like 12,000 feet and hiking to 14. And there's 50 something of these mountains. And I always say, like, there's one 14er in Washington State, but people die climbing it because you're starting at what, like 1,000 feet, and you're going up more than 10 at least. How was that?
Yes, it's a long slog. It's a long slog up to the top. And it does matter where you start. That's a good point when you're talking about mountains climbed.
It takes multiple days. It's not just the altitude. It's quite a climb. And people that do the Wonderland Trail or Ramrod, the bike ride. I mean, there's a lot of things out there. So I know we're not talking about mountaineering, but what was that climb like?
It was pretty intense, but it was amazing, honestly. I grew up in the Northwest, but strangely did not grow up doing a lot of outdoors activities. So you were talking about how people on their dating profiles in Colorado, talk about how many mountains they've climbed. It's similar in Seattle. I mean, hiking photos galore, people talking about where they like to hike. I didn't grow up doing that. My mom says nature makes her feel uncomfortable. So I just did a lot of like indoors things. I was in Girl Scouts, we went camping and stuff, but really I had never hiked in any kind of like serious way until I decided to do this climb. And I was just at this happy hour talking to some people. It was for the travel industry. And this guy organizes a charity climb up Rainier every year. And someone said, "Hey, don't you want to climb Rainier?" And I was like, "No, absolutely not." And he was like, "Don't you ever just look at it out your window and say, like, I'd like to stand on the top of that?"
Not
And I was
really.
like, "No, that has never once crossed my mind." But then the seed was planted, and within like a couple of days, I had signed up and I started training, and it was painful. I only had 3.5 months to train, which I would recommend taking a little bit longer, especially if you're coming from the background that I did, which was having not climbed before. But luckily, I did have like a good general physical fitness background. So I was able to kind of jump into it. And the problem with our climb, though, was that bad weather was rolling in. And so about 50% of the people who attempt to summit Mount Rainier do not make it. And this is largely due to weather, sometimes due to altitude sickness or, just like lack of physical preparation. But the weather is a really big factor. So we made the decision to skip our acclimatization day, which is when you get used to the altitude after having gone partway up the mountain. And so it was rough. We got to the mountain or to Camp Muir, which is your base camp, and at night. And then we were just there for a few hours, and then we set out at midnight for the summit. So it was very rushed. Only 4 of the 10 people in my group made it to the top, and I couldn't believe it when I got up there. It was incredible. It was beautiful. It's the tallest thing for states around, so it felt really majestic, and it's something I won't forget.
That's awesome. So we're here clearly to talk about you as an author, and reading your bio, you absolutely have the pedigree as a copywriter and journalist and a lot of different things with the written word. Why don't you talk about your book and what it is? Typically, the way we like to do these interviews are what you're doing now, how everything works, kind of wind it back to what got you to this point, and then, what's on the horizon. So, what is the day in the life? What is your current career like? What inspired this book?
Well, there is no typical day in the life of a writer, interestingly, or at least not for me. I've gone through a lot of iterations of my career, which is partly why I chose it, because I get to do a lot of things. But for the book, it's called Strong Like Her, a celebration of rule breakers, history makers, and unstoppable athletes. And it is a cultural history about women and physical strength that goes back all the way to ancient times through today, looking at some of the pioneers who have made it possible for women to work out today. And it ties into like cultural movements that were happening at various points. I think a lot of times when we think about strong women, we think about women being mentally and emotionally and spiritually tough, which are all super important things. But no one had ever really examined that women have physical strength too, and how this can feed into some of those other aspects of, a holistic life. So I really wanted to kind of combine my personal and professional interests and write on this topic.
So, when did you publish the book? How long did it take to write?
The book came out from Simon and Schuster in 2020. It actually launched in April 2020, right after the pandemic hit, which was not a good time in book publishing, unfortunately. So people were, preoccupied with other things, understandably, at the time. So it has been out for a couple of years, and I got the contract to write the book in 2018. I had about 9 months to write it, which is pretty fast for a book. It's also a really research intensive book. So I was really heads down while I was working on it. But I loved it. I got to go to research libraries and read old letters from some of the women that I spotlight. And I also got to work with a photographer, and we shot photos of 23 modern day athletes in the book. They're all from different sports, different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different body types. So that portion of it was really fun to work on as well. But that was all like at the same time that I was writing the book. So it was a really hectic 9 to 12 months kind of writing the book, and then just marketing it and waiting for it to come out.
So, I know I speak with a lot of authors, but normally they are someone who was a coach or educator or broadcaster who wrote a book. They're not a full time professional writer like you are. So
Right.
I know a lot of people are going to be interested in what was it like to work with a traditional publisher, and how do you secure a contract like that?
Yeah, there's so many different paths to becoming an author, and I went the traditional one, which is getting a contract with one of the big five. That's the sort of the top five publishers in the U.S. And it started with the idea, right? I first had this idea when I was training for a bodybuilding show, and I thought it was really interesting because a lot of people were like, wow, that's so cool. What does your training plan look like? What does your diet look like? What is your sparkly bikini going to look like? They had those kinds of questions. But then a lot of other people were like, don't get hurt, don't lift too heavy, don't change your body. How are you going to go on dates? Like, men don't like women who are too big. And I was like, why do people feel the need to sort of contextualize my hobby in relation to how, it might relate to the opposite sex? And why are they worried about me being too big or too bulky? Why is that of concern? And so I started to wonder about some of the first women who had lifted weights and sort of what they dealt with at the time. So I went to the Seattle Public Library, which is one of my favorite places. For anyone who hasn't been to the Central Branch in downtown Seattle, it's like an architectural marvel. And I started to check out books on the history of fitness. And as I was reading those books, I realized that there was hardly anything about women. You know, these books were mostly about men. There'd be a few sentences about women every chapter. That was kind of it. And so that's when I realized that there was really like an opening here to explore the history of women in fitness. And so, like any good writer, I sat on the idea for quite a while it kind of just like noodled around in my head. Writers can be procrastinators, but I think also I just needed to let it marinate a bit and figure out how I wanted to approach it. So I probably had the idea for about 9 months before I started to really work in earnest on the book proposal. And this is what you need in order to get an agent. And so once I had that done, I started to query agents. And I won't go too in the weeds here, but you kind of do like a summary of your idea. And then if the agent is interested, they'll typically ask you for your full proposal. In my case, it was about a 60-page document. So it's a pretty hefty document. And then you get, if you're lucky, you get an offer of representation from one or more agents, and then you choose your agent. And from there, your agent pitches the editors at different publishing houses that they think will be a good fit for your book. And so that's how that all happened.
And really, the avenue in is having representation, right? Because everyone's heard the stories that there's tens of thousands of rejections all the time, and publishing is very difficult.
Yeah, there are a few like instances where publishers will acquire a book without you having an agent. Those are typically specific kind of books, like more like a how-to book. They might reach out to an expert in a particular field to write that kind of book. But if you want to write like a novel or a major nonfiction book, typically you're going to need to and want to honestly have an agent who represents you through all of that.
So, one of the other interesting questions I have is I was looking through your website and I clicked on purchase the book. And rather than taking me to, say, that big giant company that also happens to be based in Seattle, it took me to bookstore.org. And I had never heard of this before. And someone 2 days ago who wrote a book sent me there. Can you explain how this works? Because as I understand it, it's through local bookstores and there's money that goes back into the community. And I'm really fascinated with this. And I figure there'd be no one better to explain it than you.
Yes. Well, I think it's
Bookshop,
bookshop.org
that's it.
for one. Yeah. And this is a platform that debuted, I want to say, in early 2020, maybe slightly earlier. So it's relatively new, but it's a way for independent booksellers to fulfill those online book orders. And then they get a percentage of the fee from that. So your money is kind of going back into your local booksellers when you order from Bookshop.
That's awesome. Love
Yeah, and
it.
I always do encourage people, it's fine to go and buy the book online from a major retailer, no problems there, or to check out the book from your local library. But I do like to encourage people to buy from an indie bookseller near them when they can, just because bookstores are so fun and it's hard to survive as a small brick and mortar business. So I like to support those shops when I can.
After having been in obviously tons of magazines, you've seen your work everywhere. We're about to reel back in time. What was it like to see I'm assuming your book is somewhere in physical bookstores. What was it like to walk in and see it on a shelf or do a signing? Or I guess it was a pandemic, so maybe none of these are true.
It was everything got interrupted for that reason. So it was really frustrating. I had a book launch party planned at Elliott Bay Book Company, which is our big local shop in Seattle. And I was going to New York to do a number of events as well. So it was really sad. I didn't get to see the book on an actual shelf. It came out in April, and I think I saw it in August for the first time in a Barnes and Noble in my hometown, masked up and everything. But I was super excited to see it there, and I signed the stock that they had. available. They were excited that I was there. And then after that, was able to do book signings in a few different places, which it's always super fun to just meet people who are excited about your book and excited to meet you. So I have enjoyed that part of it a lot. And it was kind of surreal to see it on a shelf for sure. I think when they first mailed it to me and I opened it, I was I'm not a super emotional person, but I was really taken aback. It was just the culmination of so many years of hard work, not just from when I got the idea, but as I'm sure we're going to talk about, having kind of pursued writing forever.
Yeah. I recently wrote a business book, and I've been speaking with a couple more um, different formats of publishers or self-publishing. It's just kind of a side thing. I'm one of those coach folks and podcaster folks that has 100 other things. It's literally propping up my laptop right now. But the proof copy came in last week, and I never thought, I was one of those people that just thought I do so much coaching and teaching and speaking that I have all of these training modules and systems that I've used for years, and I'll be able to crank out a book in a month. And it was like kind of going too memoir-y. And then I was like, oh, my parents are going to feel weird if I say that thing and these nonfiction things. And then it got super academic. And I was like, this would be great for university marketing classes, but it's not going to be cool for the solo entrepreneur that I wanted to cater to. And 2 years go by, and it's very funny because sometimes I went away. I went to Montana and I stayed at an Airbnb in Bozeman for a week and hammered on the book and finally got real about it. But I had planned on it coming out in November, and I've been editing it for 2 months now. So we'll see in the second or third edit. But anyhow, I can't imagine what it'd be like to work with a big publishing company with a actual deadline and contracts associated to it. That's got to be nerve wracking.
It was the hardest part of the process, honestly, was after I turned in the first draft of the manuscript and my editor wanted revisions on a really tight timeline. And she had not looked at any of the pages before this point. And I was just like staying up all day and night to get those revisions done. And ultimately her suggestions were amazing and they really elevated the book, and I'm glad that she took the care of editing and really cared about the organizational structure of the book to push me to make these changes. But it was really tough at the time. And yeah, it kind of like, I took a break after that. And I was like, I need a little time off before I write another book, because it is a really intense process.
So you grew up in the Northwest. I see that you went to school on the other side of the country and studied communications at Penn. What made you want to go out to the Northeast?
From a young age, just always felt like I wanted to go to the East Coast. I really felt like that was where I belonged. I was a very driven, kind of type A child, and thought, I'm going to go hang out with all of those other driven type A people, and it's going to be great. And that's where I'm going to fit in. I also had a lot of interest in history, so I've always been attracted to cities like Boston and New York and Philly just because um, they've got so much there in terms of that.
Wild. And so walk me through, you graduate, you start writing, you always been writing for magazines, or is it everywhere? Did you have a 9 to 5 copywriting job? What is it like to be a writer in your 20s?
Yeah. Okay, so my first job out of college, and I should say in college I was the editor of my college paper, so I really had already kind of started. It was a very professional paper. I worked 60 hours a week in addition to being a full-time student, so I had already really been working just without too much pay. And my internships had been, I had done an internship at a newspaper. So my first job out of college was actually with American Airlines, and I was an editor for their in-flight magazine, which was a super cool job because I don't know, we just had a lot of, it was, magazines were still kind of doing well or well-ish, so we had a pretty big staff for the magazine that we put out, and I got a lot of experience writing and editing, and um, I got to travel for free with my flight benefits, although I didn't have a lot of vacation time, so I didn't get to travel a ton. But the best thing was that I got to read a lot of really fun stories from freelance writers. And it kind of got the wheels turning in my head that this is something that I could do. I could become a freelance writer and have the opportunity to travel and tell stories like the writers that we're hiring.
So I know the days of old have changed. You know, I went to a communications school, I studied advertising, and the copywriters that I knew were a little different. They were writing things that were like one sentence long. Whatever happened to jingles? I always wanted to be a jingle writer. Um,
That's so funny because people always tell me I should be a jingle writer as
I want to
well.
be a jingle writer so bad. But anyhow, for somebody today, when these things are kind of all getting meshed together, there's a huge freelancer culture, there's a huge outsourcing culture. Let's not talk about artificial intelligence. If you were getting out of school right now and you wanted to go to be a full-time writer, or if you wanted a career change and you wanted to set out, what do you do? You know, the era of blogging kind of fizzled a little bit. How does one become two and two become three? And is it possible to start out self-employed? What would you say if you knew then what you know now?
A lot of newer writers or people graduating from college and starting their careers will ask me for this advice. And I always tell them I'm too old to give them good advice on this
Me
because
too.
breaking into the industry now is very different than it was back when I did it, even though I'm not that old. But it's just changed at such a breakneck speed that I think things are different now. Um, I think you can definitely start out as a freelancer. I was really grateful that I had a few years on staff before I went freelance because I think it gave me a good perspective on what an editor does day to day, what they're looking for in pitches that they get from writers, kind of what it's like behind the scenes. Um, and so I do both freelance editing and writing. And I think that being able to go back and forth between the two has been valuable for my career, just understanding both perspectives. So I think it is worthwhile to try to get a staff job somewhere. And these days it might be for a website, as opposed to for a magazine or a newspaper. Um, but I don't think that you have to. I think you could definitely jump straight to freelancing if that's something that you want to do. It requires so much hustling, especially in the early days. I think back to when I went full time freelance. Um, I had already been freelancing on the side for 3 years first, so I had some clients already, and I had some momentum, but I took everything that came my way. I was constantly like looking for work and pitching ideas, and it was a lot. But it got me to the place where I am today, where I don't necessarily have to do that anymore, which is nice. I can cruise a little bit if I want to, but it does take time to build up your reputation so that you can get to the point where you don't have to hustle so hard.
So this is sort of an interesting question, but I've encountered a lot lately. If you were somebody who wanted to be a writer and you wanted to do specifically something oriented around sports or entertainment, it seems like there are people that have become uh, movie reviews, for example. There are people that have used platforms like TikTok or Twitter to really propel themselves, and the content they're making may not even be anything that is journalistic in any way. But I'm seeing TikTok stars that are walking on the red carpet and have signed contracts to work for Voxer or, you know, one of the more um, not crowdsourced, but one of the more mainstream web-based ones. And even with the way that Hollywood Reporter has consolidated and a Variety and a lot of those entertainment periodicals are kind of all owned by the same company now. But it seems like this echelon of people who didn't really set out to be an influencer, they set out to be a journalist, but found the right niche. Have you seen anybody get, because, and here I am asking four questions at once. You look at something like TV news, and all of the anchors are in their mid 20s now. Whereas that anchor desk used to be somebody in their 60s, 70s. You'd do a 50-year career and you'd be
Yeah.
bouncing all over America before you even got a chance to be a correspondent. It's very odd that
Right.
journalism has gone in the opposite direction and it's way more difficult to get in. It is kind of pay your dues for staff positions. And to be a freelancer, there is no shortcut. And you just said that. So I'm not about to ask you if you dance on TikTok, can you get a job better? But have you noticed in any of those things that are covering stuff like fashion, sports, or entertainment that people have used social media to propel their long form writing as well, or podcasting?
Yeah, I think that there have always been shortcuts. I mean, there are shortcuts. I think that they look different now, and I do think social media is one of them for sure. And I think it's interesting in the author space because there are lots of books that come out from influencers or someone who did something that made them famous. And the books are not very good, right? Because they're not writers. They're probably using a ghostwriter. They probably don't really have enough to put in a memoir yet because they haven't like experienced enough or whatever it is. And yet you see these books selling a lot. But I think it's been like that forever. There have always been people who've been in the right place at the right time or had the connections that they needed. I mean, back in the day with New York magazine jobs, it was a lot about who you knew and not necessarily about how well you wrote, depending on the position. So, yeah, I think there are multiple ways to show that you have journalistic skills, and some people are really great at going on TikTok or Instagram and kind of showing that they can create content that people want to engage with, and that is attractive to some media companies. So more power to them. I just like came up through just I guess a more traditional route.
Do you think because of the kind of sensationalized nature of the media, you come from a journalistic background, but when a lot of people see that somebody can write a book about romance or mystery or sci-fi and get picked up by Reese Witherspoon's book club and get optioned for a show on Netflix, does it make people want to become fiction authors? Are there more people that aspire to write books finally now that so many things are getting picked up for TV or for these multimedia platforms? And have you ever thought about doing fiction?
I don't know if it's increased the amount of people who want to write. I think a lot of people have a dream to write a book, and I think that that is something that has been going on for a long time. I think people like the idea of writing something tangible and being in bookstores and libraries and things like that. So I don't know if that's increased the odds that are the desire for people to want to write a fiction book. Um, and I think anyone who is writing a book that gets on Reese's list is a good writer. So,
It's not their
everyone has
first
different
book.
tastes in book, and books are subjective and all of that. But in general, those are good books. So, those are people who are earning um, their fame or their recognition for those books. I have thought about writing a fiction book myself, but I've been a nonfiction writer my entire career, so I don't know if I'll ever do it, but it's something I kind of want to try out on the side if I ever have some extra time.
Once you have published a book with one of the big five publishers, does that make it easier to do another book with them? Are you kind of in the family or is it starting over for the
I
number
think
two?
theoretically, yes, but it does depend on how well your first book does in
Hmm.
terms of sales. So, um, the better your book sells, the more that people are going to want to work with you. And interestingly, I know some authors have published, with a major publisher, and then they've chosen to self-publish after that in order to have more control over the process or to get more of the, percentage of sales from those books. And I know some people who like ping pong back and forth. So I think models of publishing are changing, and there's different ways to do it and different reasons why you might want to pursue a big five contract versus want to go another route. So kind of just depends on your situation.
Okay, I can't stop thinking about it in my head. So there's Simon and Schuster, Penguin Random House, HarperCollins. Who's four and
Macmillan.
five? Oh yeah.
And oh my gosh, you put me on the spot. Um, Yeah. Oh, what's the fifth one? Oh my gosh. Are we going to have to look this
I
up?
know all of the esoteric business ones
And
to
then
think about
there's
it.
also, I should say that there are some like that are pretty big outside of, Hachette
Hmm.
is the fifth one. There are some that are not part of that five that are also really good publishers. And then you also have like academic publishers. So University of Chicago Press is a great one. And there's other college ones that still publish really good books and have that aren't super academic necessarily. So these five are not like the end all be all, but it is just sort of like a shorthand for having a major publishing with a major house.
So we're coming up on what, 3 years from publish? We're coming up on 4.5 from writing. Do you know what number two is? Have you already written number two?
I have the idea, and I'm in the stage that I was with the first book where the idea's been rattling around for a long time, and now I just have to write the proposal. With Strong Like Her, I actually wrote the entire proposal in a weekend, and this was 60 pages. It's a lot. And that included like a sample chapter, a marketing plan, the introduction, all of the chapters, a competitive analysis of other books that are out there, and all of the other good things that go into a proposal. But I was just like, I was ready when I sat down and I was in focus mode. And so this book I've been playing around with. My agent is on board, and I've been kind of telling friends and family about it, and they're on board, but it is an undertaking to sit down and write that proposal in addition to doing, my day-to-day writing. So that's one of my New Year's resolutions for this year is to get that done.
Ooh, love that. So there's a couple things that I like to ask everybody in these shows, and it's more about you than about your business. Your business is very much about you, and I'm interested in how you got into fitness and all of these other things. But what is something right now that you are very proud of? You know, when you're an entrepreneur, you don't always get the instant gratification of getting a high five every day. I don't know how often you're publishing articles or if people are telling you that they rock, but in your professional or personal life, what is something lately that's just had you jacked up?
Ooh, good question. Um, hmm. I am still just like recovering from the holidays. So there's like not a lot that I've done recently. I think that um, one thing that I'm proud of is that I understand finally the rhythms of freelancing. There's a lot of ups and downs, and those used to scare me. And I used to like not be able to relax if I didn't have work because I was like, I could, even though I knew more work was coming, I couldn't enjoy it if I didn't have any. And now I'm at the point where I'm like, I can rest. Like, more work is on the way. I should actually take advantage of this downtime. I recently spent an afternoon just going to the art museum because I'm like, I have the time. I work for myself. I'm going to go to the art museum. So I'm happy that I've been able to find a work life balance in the midst of being an entrepreneur, which is really like a 24/7 kind of a thing if you let it be.
Because you're marketing yourself and doing accounting as much as you are writing, which
Yeah,
people
you
don't
really have to
understand.
do the business side of it. And that's hard for creatives. I'm sort of someone who likes that. I love spreadsheets and I don't mind doing the business side in addition to the creative side of it. But it can be difficult to switch gears between those two.
Right. Okay, so the next one is a three-parter.
Oh,
It gets
gosh.
progressively bigger. The
Okay.
first one is, this is a business podcast. If you could do any job in the universe for one day, have you ever dreamt of, you said you're obsessed with the Olympics. Is there any, or astronauts or something? What's something you would do for one day if you could do anything?
Oh, there are a lot of jobs I'm interested in. I think if I could only do it for one day, yeah, I might want to be like an Olympic athlete just to feel what it's like to be that good at a sport, um, to be at the top of my game. That would be pretty cool.
If you were an Olympian, what sport would you like to compete in?
I was just talking about this over Christmas with someone, and I was trying to think of what I could realistically do. I guess I would say so. My all-time favorite sport to play, and the one that I played most growing up was basketball. So I would probably choose basketball, which is unrealistic because I'm 5'5", but that's what I go with.
I always really liked nobody around here does the biathlon, the cross
Yeah,
country skate skiing and shooting. It's like a
right.
very Scandinavian thing to do. And I grew up Nordic skiing and was like, it can't be that hard to learn to shoot. But you're also going total maxing out your
Yeah, your heart rate's so
cardiovascular, and then
elevated.
you're laying down and shooting in prone position. Uh, that dream never realized. But some of the really good guys are like in their mid 40s. Maybe I've still got time. There's a big speed skating community in Seattle.
Yeah,
I never
I
knew.
was a big fan of Apollo Ono when he was um, skating because we're around the same age and he's from this area, so it was always cool to see
There's
him
a
in the
gym
Olympics.
down in like Federal Way or Tacoma or something
Yeah,
that's got a
Federal
bunch
Way, I
of
think, and
bunch of
it had
Olympians.
JR or something. He had initials was the other one.
Selsky,
Yeah, and
Shelsky.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of a sport that I could like realistically do. If I moved to another country and got eligibility because they don't have a lot of athletes, like what's something at this stage of my life that I could do? And like
Liechtenstein.
maybe like archery. I know those,
Ooh.
and I don't mean to belittle that because the people in the Olympics have been doing it their whole lives and are very good at it. But maybe I have like a secret talent within me that just hasn't had a chance to express itself yet.
That'd be nice. Okay, so question number two is a little higher up. If you went back to college age you and you had to go into a different industry, was there something else you always thought you'd be good at?
I considered a couple different things in college. So one of them was event planning. I interned at a wedding planning company, and I have had the chance to sort of do that because I'm like the social coordinator for my building. I'm on my alumni committee and plan a bunch of events for that. And I plan events for other things all the time. So I've kind of gotten to express that side of my personality. So the other one is I was very interested in being a psychologist or like an investigator, a private investigator or detective. So something along those lines would have been great.
Criminal Minds, fascinating.
I
It's a
love,
lot of school.
yeah, and I think you have to do a lot of things to get to that point that I wouldn't have wanted to do. But my last boss told me that I should open an all women's private eye agency. And I do think that would be great. I'm really good at online research, so that would be my specialty. But I'm not sure I'd really want to be out there confronting criminals too much.
I like the ones that are like the forensic accountants or people that have to track down through the numbers that you can't all find on the computer. Especially in the, pre internet days when there were ledgers that needed to be looked at. Feels very national treasure or something. So, Da
Yeah.
Vinci Code.
Yes.
So,
There's so many interesting aspects and like people involved in finding, you know, finding out who did crimes that are like you would never even imagine.
right. So the 50,000 foot level is money is abundant and you can do whatever you want, but you still have to work. Have you always dreamt of being a movie producer or going to Mars or something? You can't just donate it. You have to do something.
Honestly, I think about this a lot. If I didn't have to if I had to work but I didn't have to worry about money, I would still write full time. I just wouldn't necessarily write the same things that I do now. I do a lot of different like copywriting, and right now I write a lot of social media posts, and I enjoy it. It's fun. I get to come up with clever little puns and use song lyrics and stuff, and I really do enjoy it. But I think if I didn't have to make money, I'd probably focus more on the like in-depth storytelling, reporting that takes years and years and years and lots of time and resources and may not pay off. That's probably what I would focus on.
So on the daily for regular articles or magazines or online or anything, what would you say is your bread and butter of what you do the most? And what would you say is the most in your wheelhouse of what you're great at, you love to do?
It changes all the time, honestly. So I was primarily a travel writer for a long time, and that was great. I got to travel mostly in the US and Canada, but all over the world too. I got to go to New Zealand and jump off the Auckland Bridge, and I went to Namibia and tracked rhinos on foot, and I went to Cabo and swam with whale sharks, and I did all kinds of cool things. So that for a span of probably like 5 years was my bread and butter. And then health articles for hospitals became my bread and butter, and that was where I primarily, um, had the biggest concentration of clients in. And now it is my social media posts for hospitality groups and copywriting for websites for hotels and restaurants and things like that, and helping come up with pitch decks for restaurateurs who are going to investors. And so um, it always changes, and that's fun because I love learning about new things. I loved going to school. Like, I liked homework. Tests were all right, but like I loved reading and like learning about new things. So this job is very much like being a student and always having homework and writing papers and having to learn something new. And that's what I like about it.
Love that. So, how can people follow you, engage with you, buy the book?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Haley Shapley. My website is haleyshapley.com. And you can buy the book, as we talked about, anywhere books are sold. Maybe you want to go to an indie bookseller, but if not, it's available from all major retailers.
And if somebody happens to be living in or visiting Seattle, are there any shops you want to shout out?
There are so many great shops here. Elliott Bay Book Company is great, and Third Place Books are two great bookshops in the area.
Love that. Great. Well, Haley, it's been so awesome. We're going to put all those links in the show notes. We'll look forward to catching up with you when the next book comes out. And yeah, just thanks so much for your time. This has been inspiring. I know a lot of people really kind of aspire to eventually be a writer, and it's cool to see that they still exist at the level
We're
you're at.
we're still out here, and people always ask me if I'm worried about AI, and that has gotten a lot of press lately. But I think that there will always be a demand for storytellers, human ones. So if you are interested in this industry, I would not discourage you from going into it. There was a lot of doom and gloom even when I was in college, and people saying, don't do it, it's dying. But we'll always have a need for storytelling. So I encourage people to stick with it if they're interested.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time. I've been joined today by Haley Shapley. As always, I'm your host, Andy Pedic. This is the podcast Dream Jobs, produced on the Daydreamer channel. Our head producer is Jessica Carmen. Thanks to our entire production team, our social team, our web team, and all you out there listening. We appreciate you listening to the end of all these episodes so we can connect you with our amazing guests. And we look forward to talking to you again next week. Cheers.